She's All That. Hello and welcome to Rom-Com Recaps. Today we're going to look at the classic romantic comedy She's All That. Buckle up, spoilers ahead. Let's begin. Our story starts with Laney creating an interesting piece of art before going to bring Simon his breakfast. After a little persuasion, Simon finally gets out of bed and everyone goes about their day. Later, at Harrison High, everyone comes back after an awesome spring break and Laney's father drops her off. Inside, Zack turns heads as he makes his way through the hallway, and all of the girls welcome him back to school. After catching up with Dean and Preston, his girlfriend Taylor pops up, but something is off. Suddenly, Taylor breaks up with Zack without zero warning, and she sits down to tell him exactly what happened during her spring break in Florida. While there, Taylor runs into Brock Hudson, who was on the second season of The Real World. In short, Taylor cheated on Zack with Brock the entire week in Florida. She tells him that she'll still go to the prom with him since they'll be elected king and queen, but there's no way that they would be graduating in 8 weeks and still be dating. Later in class, Laney shows off her art project, and some of the other students tell her that they appreciate how she's not afraid to show off her dark art. Their praise ends in a moment when they decide to show their real colors and bully her for no good reason. After school, DJ announces to the whole school that Taylor and Zack have broken up. And Brock actually shows up to pick up Taylor. Zack tries to play it off like Taylor is a dime a dozen, but Dean isn't buying his attitude. Zack takes a moment to point out that any girl here would be on the same level as Taylor if she's paired with him, and Dean bets that he can't turn a girl into prom queen in 6 weeks. Preston tries to call everything off, but Zack thinks he can really do it. As they shop around for a girl, Laney just happens to fall down in front of them, and Dean thinks that they've found their girl. Zack thinks that Laney is the one girl in school that he couldn't pull this off with, but Dean points out that he has absolutely found his girl. Zack goes over to invite her to the prom, but Laney leaves him hanging before he can get the question out. That afternoon, Zack's sister, Mackenzie, tells him that he'll have to put a little effort in for a girl that'll blow him off, and she sneaks out the back door as their parents get home. Upstairs, we see that Zack has been accepted to every Ivy League college he applied to, but he's keeping it a secret from everyone for now. Meanwhile, Taylor and her friends are shopping around town, and her friends try to warn her that she shouldn't alienate people if she plans on winning prom queen. Across town, Zack pops over to the restaurant where Laney works, and she reminds him that stalking is illegal. Zack takes a moment to try and play up to her hobbies, and he decides to lie about being in art class. He tells her that he likes her paintings and he wants her to help him. They agree to meet at an interpretive art show that night, but Zack has no idea what he's really getting himself into. The show is definitely not his cup of tea, but when Laney appears on stage, they end up calling Zack to the stage to show off his art skills. For the sake of the bet, Zack goes on stage, and he manages to pull off an interesting spectacle with his hacky sack skills. The audience gives him very positive feedback, and Laney thinks she sees a little something in him too. After the show, Laney and Zack leave the club, and Zack opens up about how much of a rush that was for him. The two of them seem to connect a little bit, but when Zack goes in with a heavy compliment, Laney's intuition kicks in. She tells him that all of this is surreal, and she leaves him there. Elsewhere, Taylor and Brock are getting really personal, but Brock is more caught up in watching himself on the TV. After realizing how caught up Brock is in himself, she realizes that she made a mistake. The next day, Zack goes over to Laney's house to talk to her, and he ends up meeting her father, Wayne. Eventually, Laney comes out, and she calls him over. Zack calls her out for leaving him hanging, and he invites her to the beach. She respectfully declines, and Zack decides to hang out with Simon since he invited him in. After finding this out, Laney weighs her options, and she decides that going to the beach with him is better than him spending the day with her family. The two of them walk down the beach and talk about the chemicals in the ocean, and Zack tries to tell her that she would live in the moment a little more. Suddenly, Dean and the other popular kids pop up, and Dean pulls Zack aside to help get stuff from the car. Katie and Chandler spill the beans to Laney about Taylor and Zack breaking up, and she wows everyone when she strips down to her swimsuit. Eventually, Preston comes over to ask the girls if they want to play volleyball, and Laney decides that she's going to prove that she's not the same girl that they all assume she is. By the end of the trip, Preston invites Zack and Laney to his house for a party that night, and they agree to show up. Chandler knows that this isn't going to go well since Taylor will be there though. After everyone leaves, Laney tells Zack that she actually can't go, and he takes her back to her house. After getting home, Laney tells Jesse about how the day went, and he's surprised that she turned down going to the party with Zack. He thinks that Zack might actually like her, but she seems to think otherwise. Suddenly, Zack arrives at the door, and he's brought the JV soccer team to clean her house. On top of that, he brought his sister to do her hair and makeup, and he even brought her a change of clothes. Later that evening, Mackenzie presents the new Laney, and Zack is blown away. She's definitely not used to wearing heels, though. After Zack catches her at the bottom of the stairs, they head to Preston's party. Once they get inside, Katie pulls Laney aside, and Dean tries to see where Zack stands with her now. Zack reminds her that it's just a bet, but they're interrupted when Taylor and Brock show up drunk. Laney steps aside to go to the bathroom, and she runs into Misty, who bullied her in art class the other day. Just as Laney goes to leave, Misty asks her how it feels to clean up her puke while Misty is going to her choice in art schools. Suddenly, she passes out, and Laney decides to get some revenge. Meanwhile, Zack catches up with Taylor, and she tries to play it tough. That is, until Brock decides to bust a move in front of everyone. While Brock is making a fool of himself, Misty comes out of the bathroom to see her new face in the mirror. Out in the main room, Taylor spots Laney, and she decides to try and remind her of where her place in this world is. Laney runs out of the party, and Zack chases after her. When he finally catches up to her, she's ashamed that she let everyone see her cry, and Zack does his best to comfort her. He tries to remind her that they were having a great time earlier, but she tells him that she just wants to go home. The next day at school, Laney starts to notice more and more people opening up to her and telling her how awesome she is, and Jesse even thinks that this is a little strange. Suddenly, DJ comes on the school radio to announce that Laney has been nominated for prom queen, and the other girls tell her that she deserves it. Just then, Chandler gets a page from Taylor, and we start to see the division in the friends. When Chandler goes to check on Taylor, she tells them that Brock actually broke up with her. Chandler tries to assure her that she's better off without him, but then Taylor sees a sign calling for Laney to be prom queen. Zack is at soccer practice, but his game is definitely off. In the locker room, Dean thinks that his bad performance is because of his lack of getting it on, and Zack gets really defensive when Dean talks about getting with Laney. Later, Taylor and Chandler are at a booth promoting herself for prom queen, but Laney is back home working on her art. Zack goes to check in on her, and we find out more about her late mother. Laney opens up about how she died of cancer when she was young, and Zack tries to tell her that she can't just keep shutting people out because of her past trauma. Then, Laney decides to flip the script, and she calls Zack out for being undecided on what college he's going to. Zack tells her about how the pressure from his father makes things hard for him to be his own person, and Laney tells him that he should start making some decisions on his own. She finally asks him why he really came, but at this point he's completely forgotten. He gets lost in her eyes, and he leans in to kiss her. He gets a little concerned when she mentions prom, and he bails on her. Suddenly, he's on an episode of The Real World with Brock and the others, but it turns out to just be a nightmare. The next day at school, Taylor is still pushing for everyone's vote, but Dean sees that everyone is actually going to vote for Laney. Meanwhile, Jesse can see something is wrong with Laney, and she asks him if she's kissable. Jesse can't really give her a good answer, but across the room, Simon is getting teased. When Zack sees what's going on, he puts an end to it by making them eat their own prank. Laney sees what Zack does for Simon, and something seems to be growing between them. Later at work, Dean decides to stop by Laney's job to talk to her, and he asks her out to the prom. Laney immediately turns him down, but Dean decides to plant the seed that Zack is still into Taylor. That evening, Zack goes into his room to find his father going through his acceptance letters, and Zack decides to tell him how he feels about the pressure. His father apologizes for the pressure, but he informs him that he still has to make a choice no matter what it is. The next day at school, Taylor and Laney go head-to-head, and the school is divided. Taylor decides to talk to Zack about going to the prom, but when he mentions that he might take Laney, she says that she's already spoken for. He turns around to find Dean with Laney, but when he confronts Laney about going with Dean, Dean decides that this is a good time to spill the beans on their bet. Laney asks Zack if the bet is real, and he admits that it was. Taylor comes over to rub salt on Laney's wounds, and Laney runs out of the school to work on her art. That evening, Zack tries calling Laney before going to prom, but he's not welcome at the house anymore. Wayne heads down to check on Laney, and he points out that she takes on so much sometimes that she uses it as a scapegoat for not being a teen. Wayne is worried that Laney is going to stress her life away without enjoying any of it, and he asks her about the prom tonight. When she says that she doesn't have a date, Wayne tells her that there's a young man dressed up at the front door waiting for her, and Laney heads up to see who he's talking about. When she gets there, she finds Dean waiting for her, and he tells her that even though she doesn't trust him, he didn't ask anyone else in the hopes that she would go with him. Meanwhile, Zack and Mackenzie get ready to go, and she assures him that Laney will definitely be there. At the prom, we find out that Katie is the one who nominated Laney, and there's a secret plan that no one knows about. When Zack gets there, Taylor grabs him to dance, but his attention is elsewhere. Mackenzie makes her way around the prom and she runs into Jesse. Meanwhile, Dean leaves Laney on the dance floor, and her art teacher tracks her down to tell her that her recent art has been phenomenal. She says that whoever or whatever is responsible for the change in her is something that can't be let go. Dean is in the bathroom and he's telling all the other guys that he's about to get laid by Laney. Preston and the others doubt him though, but he never expected Jesse to be in the bathroom stall. Jesse runs out to Mackenzie to spill the beans, but they suddenly start the announcements for King and Queen. Zack is revealed to be the prom king, and the prom queen ends up being Taylor. Dean and Laney excuse themselves from the prom, but Jesse tells Zack what's going on, and Zack rushes out of the prom to stop Dean. Zack tries driving around town calling hotels, but Laney arrives at home. She tells Wayne that she did end up having a good time, but Wayne calls her into the room to see Zack waiting for her. Apparently, Laney blew a self-defense foghorn in Dean's ear, and Zack takes her out back to open up about his true feelings. He asks her for one last dance, and they dance while Wayne gives them some mood lighting. Zack is a man of his word for losing the bet though, and he shows up at graduation in his birthday suit. That was She's All That. I hope you enjoyed. Remember to like and subscribe for more.